Today on RoxomTV News, a deadly winter storm sweeps across the United States, killing dozens and putting nearly 200 million Americans under cold weather alerts. In Washington, a key Senate committee is preparing to vote on a crypto market structure bill that could reshape how digital assets are regulated in the United States. But first, the federal government quietly revises its account of a fatal ICE shooting in Minnesota, triggering a White House reset, court intervention, and political fallout. All that and more on today's show. Let's get into it. Good morning and happy Wednesday here at RoxomTV News. I'm your host, Hank Hudson. Our first story this morning is taking us back to Minneapolis, where the United States federal government has now revised its account of how ICU nurse Alex Preddy was killed during an immigration enforcement operation, a change that is reshaping the political, legal, and operational fallout around ICE activity in the city. Homeland Security has disclosed to Congress that 2 federal officers fired their weapons during the encounter that killed Preddy, not one, as was previously officially stated. Now, that update follows a review of body camera footage and internal records and has intensified scrutiny of the administration's earlier explanations. According to the congressional notice, officers attempting to detain Preddy became involved in a physical struggle. During that struggle, an agent repeatedly shouted that Preddy had a gun. Investigators say 2 officers fired Glock pistols, striking Preddy 10 times. The revised account has reopened questions about how the encounter unfolded and how it was initially described to the public. Now, this comes amid continued backlash over Operation Metro Surge, a large-scale ICE enforcement effort that has been operating across Minneapolis and has already drawn protests, court challenges, and national attention. 2 people have been killed in the encounters involving federal agents in the area just this month alone, including Preddy, placing the operation under sustained pressure. Now, the White House has responded by signaling a change in posture. President Donald Trump addressed the situation during an interview with Fox News, saying his administration would de-escalate a little bit in Minnesota. Let's take a listen.
We're going to de-escalate a little bit, but I will tell you, you look at the numbers, they're doing better than they've done in many years because we took thousands of criminals out of Minnesota. I don't like the fact that he was carrying a gun that was fully loaded and he had 2 magazines with him, and it's pretty unusual. But nobody knows when they saw the gun, how they saw the gun, everything else. Bottom line, it was terrible. Both of them were terrible. The other was terrible, too. And I'm not sure about his parents, but I know her parents were big Trump fans. Makes me feel bad anyway, but I mean, I guess you could say even worse. They were.
Now, following those remarks, Trump placed border czar Tom Homan in charge of recalibrating the operation. He also removed its local leader, Gregory Bavino, whose public comments about Preddy's death earlier this week had sparked backlash. Administration messaging has also shifted. While some officials initially blamed Preddy for the confrontation, senior aides have since acknowledged that enforcement protocols may not have been followed. Deputy Chief of Staff Stephen Miller issued a statement suggesting officers may not have been acting in accordance with guidelines, distancing the White House from its early internal assessments. Judicial pressure is now also mounting. Minnesota's chief federal judge has ordered acting ICE Director Todd Lyons to appear in court, citing what the judge described as extraordinary disregard for court orders in immigration cases tied to the surge. Now, that order suggests the legal consequences of Operation Metro Surge may extend beyond the shooting itself. On the ground, enforcement activity has continued at roughly the same pace, according to journalists and activists monitoring operations. What has changed is the level of public and judicial scrutiny surrounding those actions. Minnesota Governor Tim Walz and Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey have held talks with Homan aimed at easing tensions, describing the discussions as a tentative starting point toward cooperation. Now, the episode has become a defining test of the administration's immigration strategy. Democrats describe it as evidence of systemic failures in enforcement oversight. At the same time, some Republicans are questioning whether aggressive tactics are politically and legally sustainable. The death of Alex Preddy, the second fatal shooting linked to federal agents in the area just this month, has turned Minneapolis into a focal point for a national debate over the limits of immigration policy. Now, with multiple investigations underway and courts asserting oversight, the White House now faces pressure to show whether its promised de-escalation will result in real changes on the ground. That pressure is increasingly visible inside the Republican Party, as party leaders are worried the shootings in Minneapolis are turning President Trump's once strong immigration message into a political liability ahead of the midterm elections. Strategists see the deaths of Renee Good and Alex Preddy as flashpoints that are unsettling moderate voters and independents, even as Trump's core supporters remain largely supportive of mass deportations. Polling cited by Reuters shows Trump approval rating on immigration has fallen to 39%. That's the lowest of his presidency so far. About 1 in 5 Republican voters now say federal agents have gone too far in their enforcement tactics. The report notes concern that images of masked agents and fatal confrontations in residential neighborhoods are undermining the administration's claim that enforcement is narrowly focused on dangerous criminals. Some Republicans have begun breaking ranks publicly. Minnesota State Senator Zach Duckworth wrote to senior federal officials after Preddy was labeled a domestic terrorist, calling the rhetoric a tipping point. Republican gubernatorial candidate Chris Madell quit his race in protest over what he described as indiscriminate arrests. Former Congressman Gil Gutnick warned that portraying all detainees as violent criminals was an exaggeration. And behind the scenes, White House advisors have discussed scaling back the operation and narrowing its focus to serious offenders. They fear that continued controversy could cost Republican swing districts. And Trump has already signaled openness to reducing the federal presence in Minnesota and refocusing on deportations rather than broad street-level enforcement. The result is a growing strategic dilemma for Republicans. Immigration remains one of Trump's strongest political issues, but Minneapolis has shown how quickly aggressive enforcement can alienate key voters. And as the fallout widens, Homeland Security Secretary Kristi Noem is facing escalating political pressure herself. Top House Democrats have issued an ultimatum demanding her removal, warning they will pursue impeachment if President Trump does not fire her. House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries and his deputies say violence linked to DHS operations in Minneapolis must end, placing direct responsibility on Noem's leadership. Criticism is no longer limited to just the Democrats, as Republican Senators Tom Tillis of North Carolina and Lisa Murkowski of Alaska have both called on Noem to resign, citing chaos and tragedy tied to immigration enforcement. Let's listen in.
Have confidence in Secretary. Senator, do you have confidence in Secretary Noem?
None at all.
But do you think Noem should step down?
I think Noem needs to decide what. I think if Noem looks at her body of work, I could not be. If I were in her position, I can't think of any point of pride over the last year. She's got to make her own decision, or the president does. But she has taken this administration into the ground on an issue that we should own. We should own the issue of border security and immigration. But they have destroyed that for Republicans. Something that got the president elected, they have destroyed it through their incompetence.
Senator, do you have faith in Kristi Noem as DHS Secretary?
I've already made a statement on that.
Oh, I wasn't there for it?
Yeah, I said that I've lost confidence in her. But I think we would be better served with new leadership at the department. I supported her nomination. I had great hopes for her in the department, and I've been disappointed.
Now, inside Congress, the fallout continues to widen. More than 160 House Democrats have signed onto impeachment articles. Senate Democrats are threatened to block Homeland Security funding, raising the risk of another partial government shutdown. And the Senate Judiciary Committee has summoned Noem to testify in March, ensuring the controversy remains in public view. President Trump has continued to publicly back Noem, saying she is doing a very good job, even as oversight of the Minneapolis operation has been reassigned to Tom Homan. Now, that reshuffle has fueled speculation that confidence in her leadership may be weakening behind the scenes. And the political fallout has also exposed the rapid rise and sudden unraveling of Gregory Bovino. You see, just a year ago, Bovino was a relatively obscure regional border patrol commander in California. Within months of Trump's return to office, he was promoted into a highly visible national role overseeing large-scale operations in Democratic-led cities. He regularly appeared on conservative media defending hardline tactics. And his approach, marked by militarized raids, confrontations with protesters, and an active social media presence, made him a central symbol of the administration's enforcement push. That prominence became a liability after the deaths of Renee Good and Alex Preddy. Bovino publicly defended both shootings, repeatedly claiming the victims posed lethal threats. Those statements were later undermined by video evidence and revised federal accounts. And investigators and senior officials grew concerned that his comments were damaging the government's credibility and complicating legal reviews. And behind the scenes, Bovino operated unusually close to Secretary Noem, often bypassing traditional chains of command. That dynamic accelerated his rise, but amplified scrutiny once controversies mounted. And after Preddy's death, the White House quietly moved Bovino out of Minneapolis and placed Tom Homan in charge. Trump later acknowledged Bovino had pushed too far in Minneapolis, and for critics, Bovino's trajectory illustrates how aggressive enforcement strategies can quickly evolve into political risk. And the legal backlash is now expanding far beyond the borders of Minnesota. Democratic-led states are moving to expand their ability to sue ICE officers in state courts. Illinois has already passed a law allowing civil rights claims against federal agents accused of violating constitutional protections. Similar measures are now being considered in California, New York, Virginia, Maryland, and Connecticut. And supporters argue the proposals would allow victims to seek damages for unlawful searches, detentions, or use of force. Now, the Trump administration is fighting back, suing to block the Illinois law, and officials argue state-level lawsuits violate the Constitution's supremacy clause by interfering with federal authority. DHS says the measures unfairly target officers operating under dangerous conditions, and legal experts say the outcome could reshape how federal agents are policed nationwide. Now, if courts uphold the laws, ICE officers could face personal financial liability in state courts for the first time. Supporters describe it as a turning point. Critics warn it could discourage agents from doing their jobs. Now, I want to give you my quick beat on this, all right, because this has been an evolving story. We've been talking about this for weeks now. So here's the part that currently really matters to me, okay? And it's simpler than what people want to make it. This didn't spiral because immigration enforcement is controversial, and it didn't spiral because the policy itself suddenly changed. This situation spiraled because the operation looked messy from the start and then got messier as the facts kept shifting. When you send federal agents into a major U.S. city, end up with 2 people dead in the same month, and then revise basic details about who fired and how many shots were fired, you don't get the benefit of the doubt anymore, no matter where you fall on immigration. I mean, at that point, the issue stops being ideology and starts being about execution. Republicans didn't begin to worry because they lost their appetite for enforcement. They started worrying because suburban voters don't love seeing masked agents operating in neighborhoods, followed by body counts and changing explanations. That combination is politically toxic, even for people who broadly support tougher border policy. So this wasn't a narrow precision operation that stayed focused on high-risk targets. It came across as a show of force, and a show of force policing in civilian areas almost always ends the same way, with judges stepping in, lawsuits piling up, and leadership quietly reassessing the people who were front and center when things went sideways. That's why the White House suddenly started talking about de-escalation, not because the policy changed and not because the politics shifted overnight, but because the rollout failed and the cost of staying aggressive in Minneapolis started to outweigh whatever upside they thought they were getting. If this had been clean, controlled, and tightly scoped, it wouldn't be the lead story of the day, but it wasn't. And Minneapolis ended up showing exactly where the line is between looking tough and losing control. All right, we're taking a quick break here at RoxomTV News, but when we're back, we got more of today's top news stories, and in just a bit, we're going to be joined by a special guest to help break them all down. More RoxomTV News coming your way right after this quick break.
Some call me Chicken Little, others Bubble Boy. I'm a bit changed, but sounds familiar, right? Let me tell you a hard truth. The S&P isn't rising, the dollar's falling. That's the trick. Monopoly money. It's ice melting by the second. Your savings, your salary, your time. Worth less every second. Everyone's using the wrong measuring stick. Switch the denominator. Price the S&P into Bitcoin. Hard, fixed, unprintable. Suddenly your unstoppable index, it's collapsing. And while you cling to dollars, well, Wall Street already switched. Before, you needed 2 brokers.
Still getting my ninja bonus though, right?
Plenty of spreadsheets. And my quant!
I hate this part.
I was right, and I'll be right again. If I were you, I'd thank me.
You know my name's Dave, right?
To RoxomTV News as we broadcast from our mobile studio again today through the rest of the week. And we're going to move on to our next story of the morning that's occurring from Washington to Seoul as officials are working to calm nerves after President Donald Trump softened a sudden tariff threat against South Korea. You see, Trump had warned that tariffs on South Korean imports could rise as high as 25%, accusing the country of failing to meet commitments tied to recent trade agreements. Now, the warning caught South Korean leaders off guard and sent diplomats into immediate damage control mode. U.S. officials say Washington previously agreed to lower tariffs in exchange for South Korea's pledge to invest hundreds of billions of dollars in the United States to expand markets for American car makers and reduce trade barriers. The administration now argues that key investment approvals and regulatory bills remain stalled in South Korea's parliament. American negotiators have also raised concerns over South Korea's digital regulations, saying they could disadvantage U.S. technology firms. South Korean officials dispute that claim, insisting that rules are not targeted and that investment approvals are progressing, though more slowly than Washington would prefer. Now, aftermarkets reacted nervously to this news, and Trump signaled a softer approach, saying the two countries would, quote, work something out. Both governments now appear focused on negotiation rather than escalation. Now, why this should matter to viewers at home is that trade disputes rarely stay theoretical. They affect prices, supply chains, and jobs, especially when they involve major exporters and longtime allies. Joining us today on the show, we have one of our good friends of the program, Piotr Bedkowski from Zapo Bank. Piotr, happy Wednesday. Thanks for joining us. Great to see you. How are you?
I'm feeling great. Thanks for having me, Hank. Great to join the show today.
Pleasure is all mine, Piotr. Great to have you on. We got a lot to talk about this morning, and I want to start with this most recent story. So, Piotr, when people hear a president threaten tariffs and then soften that position days later, we've kind of heard it before, they're now kind of left wondering how seriously to take those initial threats. So from a market perspective, does this kind of back and forth still move money, or do you think investors are starting to discount these threats unless action actually follows them? What's your beat on this situation?
Yeah, so I think investors are slowly realizing what Donald Trump and the Trump administration has been doing in the past months and during this administration. So basically, this is the tried strategy that Donald Trump used throughout his life. I think he starts, with a very high tariff and then says, because he wants to force you to the negotiating table, basically, right? He wants to start talking from a position of strength. So he starts with like 25% tariffs, and then we sit together at the table, we negotiate, and we end up at, 10% tariff or 8% tariff, which was his aim all along from the very beginning. But he wanted to look like, someone who is negotiating actually and is giving away something. So that's a tactic that he always been employing, and now we see this all across different countries, right? We have those stories with European Union, with other countries, those trade disputes. What I wanted to point it out is specifically the aspect of South Korea, because South Korea is a big manufacturer. I mean, they are producing, Kias, cars. I mean, there's lots of stuff that's coming from South Korea. We have Samsung, we have Samsung phones, we have Samsung refrigerators. We have lots of stuff from Samsung, for example, but other companies, and so they export a lot, and they export so much stuff, and US is running deficits with them, meaning, what does it mean? It means basically that US is buying more stuff from South Korea than South Korea is buying from US, and that means that the money net is flowing out of the country, which obviously is not helpful. It's not helping Americans because it's destroying the jobs, right? Because that car is now produced in South Korea and is only being sold in the United States, but actually the people who are like literally manufacturing, building this car, is producing those goods and services, they are from South Korea. And so there's been a trend that Trump tries to reverse this trend somehow by imposing all those tariffs all over the place. It's not only South Korea. I mean, it's France, European Union, China, all the other countries. We'll see how successful that will be, because it's debatable whether you can even do it, whether you can bring back your industrial base. Ideally, he would probably want something like, South Korea will probably need to invest back in the United States, meaning that it would create a factory, for example, in the United States and employ lots of people, and that would give jobs to Americans inside United States. That's the ideal outcome. But whether it will happen, well, we're not sure, because the unit cost, I mean, if that car is still better and cheaper to produce, offshore, like beyond the seas, then maybe it's not possible or not worth the hassle to bring this back. So that strategy may not work, and we'll see what the final consequences will be of that.
Yeah, I'll be really interested. I mean, we've had our second term of the Trump presidency for a year now, and we've kind of seen this play out, as you mentioned. He really rattles the cage, kind of sees what the reaction is, and then kind of walks it back a little bit. Not that surprising, because he really comes from a business background, so he just wants to make things happen, see what the reactions are, and move forward. He obviously doesn't want to get caught up in the bureaucracy of the government, as often things happen in the government. So, and this one with South Korea is specifically interesting, is the point you mentioned, because this isn't just another trading partner. This is a close ally of the United States and a major exporter of a lot of things, like you mentioned: cars, electronics, semiconductors. So my question for you, Piotr, is, does that relationship make this situation maybe look a little more serious in the eyes of investors? Or does it maybe actually lower the odds that things spiral out of control, because this is such an important partnership for the United States? Where do you land on that?
Now, yeah, that's a very good point. And the problem with that strategy that Trump is employing is that, South Korea is an ally, is a rather close ally, but so is Australia, so is UK, and other countries. Japan as well in Asia. And if U.S. administration, I know that they need to fix that trade balance, but if they handle and treat their allies or close allies like this, then this may spiral out of control at some point. Because right now, as you said, like, Trump is doing this with the cage, but at some point people may really become upset about this and really look for other options. And this is especially problematic because US is supposed to be a reliable ally to those countries. And then if the signals from US are that every country is on its own right now, and those alliances are not the like of which, like, we remember from a Bush administration like 20 years ago, when it was like America's like a global policeman, and everybody's looking up to America. America will never leave you. Like, America's pioneering the American values everywhere, etc. If that's not the world that we're living in anymore, but it's just a world where America is just yet another country trying to be, push for its own interests without regarding those alliances, then it may spiral out of control. It may lose, the trust will be eroded across countries, and then it may even raise the geopolitical tensions and may lead to even wars or something like that. So that may become a difficult situation as time goes by.
Yeah, no, absolutely. The geopolitical patchwork of the world right now seems to be in a far different place than it was even just 12 months ago, with a lot of the things we've seen Trump institute in the last year. So it will be interesting to see how this ultimately plays out, as the United States stops treating allies like allies and starts treating them like just another business partner or client. So it's a dramatic shift that we have seen. And like you mentioned, I'll be curious to see how this all plays out. But only time will tell, I guess. All right, we're going to move on to our next story here that's going on in Europe, where it's actually becoming quite the pressure point in global markets this week. You see, across the Eurozone, the euro has climbed past $1.20, reaching levels not seen in more than 4 years. The move has been driven less by sudden strength in Europe and more by ongoing weakness in the US dollar, which has pushed investors to look elsewhere for stability. Hedge funds and large institutional players are now betting the rally still has room to run. Option markets show growing expectations that the euro could reach 125 by mid-year, with some analysts pointing to 130 as a longer-term possibility if capital continues flowing into European assets. Now, for the European Central Bank, this surge creates a bit of a policy dilemma. A stronger currency lowers import costs and helps consumers, but it also suppresses inflation at a time when policymakers are trying to keep price growth near target without stalling the entire economy. Several ECB officials have previously warned that sustained strength above 120 could complicate monetary policy and potentially force interest rate cuts sooner than planned. Now, behind the scenes, central bankers are watching closely to see whether this rally reflects real investment into European stocks and bonds, or is mostly a reaction to uncertainty around U.S. economic policy. Now, that distinction matters because dollar-driven rallies tend to reverse more quickly than investment-led ones. Now, for those of you watching at home, this matters because currency moves influence inflation, borrowing costs, and global investment flows, even if you never exchange euros yourself. And right now, Europe's central bankers are being pushed into decisions sooner than they expected, with markets clearly setting the pace. We're bringing Piotr back here. Piotr, a stronger currency sounds like good news on the surface, but it's not always that simple. When the euro moves this high, is that something European policymakers actually want, or does it start creating new problems for growth and exports? What's your read on this situation?
Yeah, so it's definitely so the fact that euro is strengthening against the dollar, and dollar has actually been weakening. Actually, dollar is pretty weak right now. That's not good news. I mean, that's good news for Europeans consumers who are spending euros, their euros, but that's a bad news for for European manufacturing base and exports, because they are obviously exporting goods. And their costs are in euros, and also, their prices are in euros. So if someone from outside Europe wants to buy stuff from Europe, like a French perfumes, whatever that is, Lamborghini, then they will pay more. And for a specific person, it may not that matter, but on aggregate in economy, like as taken as a whole, this matters much. Because those exports for example, Germany is a big country, right? That the exports is a leader in exports from Europe. The France is close, so those countries will struggle. Because all of a sudden, the same thing is more expensive now. The French wine is more expensive. The BMW is more expensive now, right? And if someone from outside, if Chinese want to buy BMWs now, it will cost them more now. So
right.
Which leads me to think that obviously the central bank, European Central Bank, don't want to have this problem. And how do you solve this problem? Well, you devalue the currency, which I think we are going in this direction where European Central Bank and Christine Lagarde, and they will start considering, some more interventionist policies there to try to keep euros suppressed a bit, so that the exports are still competitive, because otherwise, if they stop being competitive, people will stop buying, BMWs and Volkswagens, and they will be buying, Chinese cars or South Korean cars or just Asian cars. So, because they are cheaper, and that sort of like adjusted value that you're getting, price to value, is going to be better. And that would also kill the growth within European zone, right? Because the major powerhouse of European economy is obviously Germany, selling cars, selling stuff, machines, and then France selling what was it? Perfumes. I'm joking about those perfumes, but it's like LVMH is one of the biggest in the world, right? The conglomerate that is selling. They are not only selling perfumes, but they are selling bags, luxury stuff, all of that different things. They are the biggest on the planet right now, but all of that stuff will be more expensive now, and that's a problem. So I expect that there will be some kind of push or pressure to devalue the euros. And that also leads me a little bit to Bitcoin again, because
Yeah.
if euro is being devalued and dollar is not faring well too, and deficits are growing and there is nothing stopping this train anymore, then the scarce assets, including commodities, which is now a big, there is lots of noise around this because the gold performance, silver now, the next one people are saying is copper, platinum, anything that is scarce that actually takes energy to dug out of the ground and actually process, anything physical, anything you can really touch and you need to expend energy to get out of the ground, this goes up in price. So it's not that it's going up in price. It's basically the fiat currency is devaluing, and I expect also in relation to Bitcoin, which is the scarce decentralized asset. I think there will be some at some point. Now we may be in the bear year, but there will be some catch up to do. Obviously, I don't know when, but there will be some catch up to do with what's happening. So I expect. I think that the direction is unfortunately devaluing the currency, debasement of the currency, maybe slowly but surely, and then assets that are scarce, and also, for example, including real estate, a premium real estate, a prime real estate, all of these assets will accrue in value in nominal terms, and I think that's probably the direction for the next few years.
Yeah. And this is important, I think, especially for American viewers out there, because we see this happening across the pond and it doesn't really register with us here in the United States of how this could potentially affect us. And you made some great points. My fancy French perfumes that I'm always buying, going to be a lot more expensive. The Lamborghinis that I can't afford but dream about always buying, I really can't afford them now. And it's causing these policymakers, as you mentioned, to consider actually, debasing the euro, which can be problematic. And you mentioned Bitcoin in this. So if we have policymakers in the European Union talking about purposely debasing the euro for economic reasons, is that why Bitcoin is so important going forward? Because it's something that exists outside of these forces that are debasing currency to adjust trade and all that stuff. Can you go into why that's so important going forward, Piotr? Why Bitcoin has this place in the world? Is it because of instances just like this?
Yes, absolutely. And not only that, because this triggers some kind of a game theory of sorts. Because imagine you're a European central bank and you debase a currency a bit. Obviously, you never call it debasement. You just intervene in the financial markets by adding liquidity to the system and buying additional 100 trill bonds, right? It's just where that money comes from. Well, it just comes from the bank, right? It just comes from there. The thing is, if you have the issuer of a fiat currency, which is a central bank that has it under control, then obviously Europeans can do this, but then it triggers a game theory, sort of, because other central banks are looking and may also do this. Because all of a sudden, if euro were to weaken towards the dollar, then all of a sudden the other bank wants to reverse the situation, and we go into a spiral where every single currency is being debased because, well, we want to fight for our exports, right? We don't want to lose jobs. We don't want people on the streets. We don't want homelessness and stuff, unemployment. We want to prevent those problems. That's why, they will say that the inflation and the debasement is necessary smaller evil, let's say, a small thing that needs to be done, but we are preventing bigger problems from happening, right?
Right.
And then every single fiat currency that can be printed, that you have control over supply, will be debased eventually. That's what history teaches, and that's the play that you see here, especially vis-a-vis the exports. And now Bitcoin is the beauty of Bitcoin is that Bitcoin is finite, and it's a scarce asset that doesn't have an issuer. So we don't have any instance, any company, any person, any CEO, any group of hackers, any group of developers, any committee, any regulation body that would basically decide that from now on you will have 26 million Bitcoin total supply, and then we will increase the how much is mined every 10 minutes, whatever. So we don't have this. It's just
Yeah.
fixed in the code, and no one can change this. So if no one can change this, no one controls this, it becomes almost like a force of nature, like a physical law. Like you cannot change the gravity, you cannot change the issuance of Bitcoin. And if no one has control of it, then everybody can trust it, because you can trust the gravity won't change. You can trust the Bitcoin issuance won't change. You cannot trust that your central bank won't change the issuance of the fiat currency.
Right.
So as much as as much as I like, obviously I want people, like, I don't want unemployment and all of that stuff. Then yeah, that's at least one thing that we can agree on, that that supply is basically finite, and the asset remains scarce.
Yeah, no, I mean, Bitcoin has maintained those principles throughout its short but extensive 16, 17-year history. And, we see there's clearly cracks in the current monetary system. And as we kind of say, and it's become a running joke in the space, Bitcoin fixes this. So, for those of people out there that aren't involved yet, it might be time. All right, speaking of history, we're going to move on to our next story, where history is currently unfolding in Washington, where a niche financial platform is trying to become part of the policy mainstream. See, prediction market company Kalshi is opening a new office in the Capitol and hiring senior policy staff as it works to shape how regulators and lawmakers view its business. The company says it has brought on former Biden administration official John Bivona to lead federal government relations, and added a former Amazon public policy executive, signaling a much more aggressive push inside of Washington. Now, that move comes as Kalshi faces growing scrutiny over whether its event-based contracts resemble unlicensed gambling. Lawmakers and regulators are increasingly focused on platforms that allow users to wager on elections, government shutdowns, and economic data. Kalshi argues it operates as a neutral marketplace, not a sports book, and says it's engaging with policymakers on both sides of the aisle as it looks ahead to a larger role during the 2026 election cycle. At the same time, new research is strengthening the company's credibility. A Bloomberg reported study found Kalshi's forecasts of Federal Reserve decisions and key economic data were roughly as accurate as professional Wall Street economists, and in some cases, even more precise. Researchers say the platform's real-time pricing captures information traditional forecasts often miss. Together, the political expansion and academic backing mark a pivotal moment for Kalshi. Now, the company itself is positioning itself as a serious forecasting tool and a regulated financial platform, even as critics warn about legal gray areas and the risk of manipulation. Now, why this should matter to those of you watching at home is that prediction markets are quietly influencing how information is priced and consumed. Whether Washington embraces or reins them in could determine if these markets become a permanent feature of U.S. finance or remain on the margins. We're bringing Piotr back. Piotr, many viewers are now only hearing about prediction markets like Kalshi. Why do you think Washington is suddenly paying attention to these platforms now when they've existed in some form for years?
Yes, this is one of those instances where technology and innovation catches on, and at some point it becomes so big and influential, then especially in the prediction markets, that starts influencing the events themselves.
Right.
And this is tricky because depending on the size of the event and the impact of the event, for example, the elections or US presidential election, we saw this during the last presidential election already, when markets and people were betting on different candidates. And it's even funny because I can see in elections in Poland, we had very similar different candidates and people were betting, and it was actually, those results were actually better than the exit polls in terms of how the candidates would score. But this, if you have access to this information and if you control it, you can influence the event, because people are looking what others are doing and how others are voting. Voting is supposed to be like a secret thing. But if people know that this candidate is likely to win, well, they basically flock to that candidate, which creates this reflexive, self-enforcing loop, right? And also, like, if I own this platform, I can decide who to include or exclude from that. So basically, if it's like demographics, elderly, younger generation, women, like these people with disabilities, people of color, like I can do all of this stuff and start segregating. So that's why regulators are looking at this, because if it's so powerful, becoming so powerful, then it needs to be looked at, and there needs to be some rules there, because otherwise this may get out of hand. And I guess it's time. I mean, everybody was looking at this prediction markets as like a novelty, but now it's like the realization that wow, like this is real, and this can really change the results. I mean, this is like a stakes now.
Yeah, you're so right. I think we were looking at these prediction markets as a bit of a novelty, but now you're seeing them catch fire. You're able to bet on pretty much anything. And we're not, I think, fully grasping the types of signals these bets could potentially signal when they're made. I mean, I've talked about this. I think I spoke yesterday about it too. We were talking about Polymarket. Like, what happens when large bets are placed on events that might have a lot of sensitive material? Like, for instance, one I brought up yesterday, I have a friend who sent me a Reddit post of this guy on Polymarket who placed a huge bet that by the 31st of this month, Israel was going to have attacks on Iran. So what if that's an insider espousing this private information for financial gain, and then somebody catches wind of it from somewhere else, and all of a sudden what was supposed to be like a national or international secret is kind of out in the open because money talks, and people probably aren't going to put money behind something unless they're very convicted about it. So it does introduce some interesting and kind of scary situations going forward that I don't think we know how to regulate yet, which is probably why we're seeing this happen right now. And it also begs another question, Piotr, because when people see that these markets are sometimes outperforming polls or even economists, they naturally are asking whether they should trust them more. So my question for you is, do you think viewers should think of prediction markets as a useful signal, or is it just another tool among many that still needs context? Where do you land on their usefulness right now?
I think because of the fact that you put your money where your mouth is, and you basically back up your claims with real money, and you bet, and you have a skin in the game, so to speak, there, and you have a stake to lose if you're wrong. That is exactly the reason why those markets in general were pretty roughly correct about what is going to happen. So they were discounting the future events, what's going to happen pretty accurately, I would say, just because there is like skin in the game. There is real money behind the table that basically is backing up these. Because people, if you have nothing to lose, I mean, you may have different opinions. At the end of the day, you go to the ballot and you basically vote for a candidate, this candidate, another candidate. You may change your mind, whatever that is. You may be influenced by bad sleep night that you had last night and decide to vote differently. But so that's not very reliable. Even also in the exit polls, if they are being asked, like some people don't want to disclose who they're voting for example, or some people are not comfortable sharing this information. But here, when you have something that someone is betting on this and putting his money on the table that he may lose, then all of a sudden this becomes like a reinforcement, like an honest signal, and reinforces the whole thing. And that's why I think this will grow in importance. And that insider trading is also a good thing. It's also good thing to have a look at from that perspective, because when you have insider trading, you have the information that changes the markets, right? Something that is all of the market. If you have a very sensitive information about the company performance or the event that's going to happen, you can bet on that, and you can actually make a lot of money on that. I mean, if you, for example, knew that, just as an example, I don't know, that one country is going to attack another country, or something is going to happen on a stock exchange, or will be closed on some day at specific country. If you knew that, you can, like with almost 100% certainty, then you would bet accordingly. And if you bet accordingly, that would translate into real gains. So in that sense, information is a real edge And that's why regulators are probably concerned about, information asymmetry. So is everybody getting the same information? That's why you have stock exchanges structured in a way where everybody's getting the same information, because it's supposed to be like whatever companies are publishing, you should know, you should have access to this, etc., etc. Because if you don't know, then you may be investing into something that, you shouldn't be investing to. So those prediction markets, I mean, they're a strong signal. They will be giving strong signals.
Yeah. And I think there are levels to this too, because like we're not even considering that, like if we're going to be willing to trust somebody because they put money behind a prediction, right? It also makes it right for misinformation, purposefully including misinformation in the future to throw people off your trail, especially if you're betting on big, cultural or like government policy events happening. Like there's just a lot of room for bad tactics and bad actors in this space to manipulate markets even more than we already see them manipulated today. So while it's fun and I love to gamble, that's exactly what this feels like to me on every single level. So I'll be curious to see where they fall in terms of regulating these going forward, because we are still in the nascent phase of these prediction markets. So I'll be curious. They're fun, but I think they could also be pretty dangerous, but we'll see how it ends up playing out. All right, Piotr, you and I are going to take a quick break, but when we're back, we're going to be going over our top Bitcoin story of the hour. So stay tuned. More Roxom TV news coming your way right after this quick break. Welcome back to Roxom TV News. Currently, the Bitcoin price is sitting at $89,000 this morning, and that brings us to our top Bitcoin story of the hour. That comes from Washington, where the U.S. Senate Agricultural Committee is preparing to vote on a major crypto market structure bill that could define how digital asset markets are regulated at the federal level. Now, the bill focuses on clarifying regulatory responsibilities between federal agencies overseeing crypto markets. And at the center of legislation is an expanded role for the Commodity Futures Trading Commission in regulating certain digital asset activities. Now, the Agricultural Committee has jurisdiction over the CFTC, which is why the bill is moving through this panel rather than the Senate Banking Committee. Politically, the proposal remains divided. Only Republican committee members have publicly endorsed the bill so far, despite weeks of bipartisan negotiations that already delayed a previous vote. Still, the latest version of the legislation has received broad support from the crypto industry. The vote is scheduled to take place tomorrow, and that timing, however, is far from certain. You see, a major winter storm recently disrupted travel in and out of Washington, forcing the Senate to cancel votes late last week. Whether that happens this week may come down to logistics rather than ideology. We're bringing Piotr back. Piotr, it's taken Congress years to even get close to a vote like this. Why has agreeing on crypto market structure, even at a basic level, been so difficult for lawmakers? What are your thoughts on this?
Yeah, so this is because obviously that piece of legislation includes, in its basic version, it includes some pieces that can be controversial. For example, one of that is the ban on stablecoin yield. And I can understand why the Senate has keeps adding amendments and is basically reviewing this, because for example, for that specific instance of stable coin yield ban, they see how stable coins grew in importance, and also what the volumes are and how many people are using stable coins, and how that part of the industry grew in the recent years. And obviously a stable coin, a digital US dollar, is basically competing with US dollar. And if the stable coin has a yield attached to it, that's even worse. because normally, banks don't pay you anything in a standard checking account, right? They pay like 0% or 0.5, 0.1, like 10 bips. And it's a pretty great deal for banks. I mean, it's a great business because they take this money, they invest that or put it into loans, fractional reserve, all of that stuff. But you don't get much out of it. It's just a checking account. While if you had a stable coin product where you just keep US dollars, but it also paying you a yield daily, whatever that is. It's yield bearing. It's almost like every account is now a savings account. Then obviously this would be very attractive to the consumers. And if it's attractive to the consumers, that would mean that the adoption of this thing would be very big. And that would translate in some of that money moving into stablecoin yield bearing accounts, which obviously they don't want to let this to happen. So this is one of the pieces of controversial and it's also like why they are adding those amendments there. And also like I like about this this piece of legislation, actually, I like the fact that the decentralization test is there. So it's basically, it will introduce a clarity of if we have a cryptocurrency that is actually decentralized, right? Sufficiently decentralized. So there is no one person, one company, one group that controls that cryptocurrency, that project. And this is specifically, tailored to cater for Bitcoin. Then it means that, this is decentralized commodity. And this is something no one has control over, and it's treated differently. It's in a different bucket than the projects that are basically like tokenized securities or investment contracts where you have a company, you have a CEO behind it. There is a company that's issuing a token, and it works like a security because you're trusting that third party, trusting the company, the CEO, the management team that is issuing that cryptocurrency. Some of that stuff is also net positive that is in the piece of legislation. I haven't read it like totally page to page, but one thing that I noticed is that, it's pretty basic stuff in terms of consumer protection, for example. So, you shouldn't, as a crypto exchange, you shouldn't be commingling, your funds with the customer funds. And this is what FTX was doing, obviously. And that's why they went bust, FTX style. But if companies are doing this, they cannot do this. And it's pretty basic. It's something like you would say it's pretty rational thing to do, pretty safe and secure. Think of managing the business, but it's like, it feels almost like a fundamentals or a basics to have proper basics in place so that you can conduct the business for exchanges. Just don't commingle, like separate your funds from your customer funds, obviously. And there is also an emphasis around the security and cybersecurity. We are in 2026 with AI, with deep fakes, with hacker attacks, impersonation, phishing everywhere. There are people impersonating, and this all AI, right? With all those threats, security is paramount, and cybersecurity as well. And so if you are a crypto company, you need to have a cybersecurity or security team, whoever that is. You need to have people that are looking at this and asking themselves, are we secure enough every day, and employing strategies there. And this needs to be in place, because otherwise I cannot trust a company that's just doing some random security stuff that wouldn't pass any security audit, and it's just at the end of the day they will lose funds or be hacked or whatever that is. So these are pretty basics, and like just make sure you have basics in place, then you can conduct the business.
There's a lot of questions that need to be answered, and I think the entire industry is literally looking for clarity right now. That's always the word on the tip of everyone's tongue. And from an institutional perspective, Piotr, is having clear but imperfect rules better than operating in a gray area with no rules at all? Where do you sit on that one?
No, so I love the I love the Wild West. That's obviously better for innovation. You can move faster, and you're a cowboy there. But the thing is, especially in crypto and in Bitcoin, we've been there already. I mean, we went there. We've been there.
True.
It's like 10 years ago. We've been there. We've done that. Like, if you have an environment like this, you have companies, popping up and then going bust and going out of business, names that we have, heard about, like FTX, Celsius, and others, and that they have disappeared. It's funny because at the time, it always feels like those big names, like they're on top of their game, they are very reputable, everybody's talking about them, and then something happens and turns out they didn't have a proper basics in place, and they just go out of business. And so as much as I love the innovation and Wild West playground, then at some point, and I think we have reached that point now, is time to not over-regulate, because that's horrible. Not stifle the innovation, but basically set up a clear framework, clear rules, so that everybody knows what is best practice, what is allowed, what is not allowed, what is definitely not allowed, and then giving people clarity that if they build products and services, then those products and services won't be harmful to consumer base in general. Because if we really want to scale the adoption of crypto, you really want my mom to use crypto in such one way or another. I mean, this needs to be like safe and secure way of accessing and using this. Like, my mom cannot be second guessing herself, is this Bitcoin going to disappear tomorrow from her app?
Right.
I mean, it just needs to be like given, like her bank account, like this is guaranteed. It's just there. Someone looked at that. Someone regulated it. Someone made sure it's secure. It's all of that stuff. So yeah, if you want to get to like consumer level, hundreds of millions of people adoption, then you need to have those rules. Otherwise, it's not possible.
Yeah, as you and I have enjoyed the Wild West era that we've experienced for the last decade or so, you're totally right. In order to get mom and pop and John Q. Public fully on board the Bitcoin train, it was probably always going to have to work this way, where we're going to need some real clarity and regulations in place to let Joe Consumer feel comfortable about getting his feet wet in the orange waters, so to speak. So I couldn't agree with you more. And I got to say, Piotr, it's always so great to have you on the show. It's been a minute, so we're so glad to have you back. And I'm sure you've gained at least a couple new fans during our time this morning. So for those at home, they're like, man, I need more of Piotr, what he's up to, what his hot takes are, and what him and the team at Xapo are currently developing. What's the best place I can send them to get more info about you and the team?
Yeah, go to our website, zapobank.com. Have a look at our products, what we are doing for Bitcoiners, new products that we've launched or are launching. Bitcoin-backed loans, yield products, stocks and ETFs, trading, Bitcoin vault, security, all of that stuff. We have it. It's amazing. And personally, I'm on X, so I'm posting from time to time. I need to be posting sort of more regularly in a disciplined way, but it's sometimes it's hard. So go to my X and have a look at stuff that I'm posting. And yeah, DM me if you have any feedback. Then I always love to connect.
Amazing. Well, Piotr, thank you so much for joining us today. It was great to have you back on, and we're excited to have you again on the show real soon. And enjoy the rest of your Wednesday, my friend. Great seeing you.
You too. Thanks, Hank.
Cheers. Thank you. All right, gang, we're going to take a quick break here at RoxomTV News. But when we're back, we're going to be getting into our second hour of today's show with more top news stories. So stay tuned. More RoxomTV News underway right after this quick break.
Security matters. Xapo Bank, the only way to bank your Bitcoin. Apply now at zapobank.com.
Welcome back to RoxomTV News. We just finished up the first hour of this morning's program, and we're about to dive into our second hour of news this morning. But before we do, here's a quick recap of what we covered during the first hour of today's show. We started in Minneapolis, where new federal disclosures changed the picture around the killing of ICU nurse Alex Preddy, with Homeland Security confirming that 2 officers fired their weapons, not one. Now, that revision has driven a broader reset inside the White House, with leadership changes and growing political fallout as Democrats and Republicans alike question how aggressive ICE operations are being carried out. From there, we shifted to trade tensions between the United States and South Korea after President Trump softened a threatened 25% tariff that had rattled markets and caught Seoul off guard. Officials on both sides are now signaling a preference for negotiation, but the episode highlighted how quickly tariff threats can spill into prices, supply chains, and jobs when they involve major trading partners. And we also looked at Washington, where the Senate Agriculture Committee is preparing to vote on a major crypto market structure bill that could shape how digital asset markets are regulated at the federal level. Now to our top story of this hour. Guys, let's roll the stinger. Our first story of this hour takes us across the central and eastern United States, where a powerful winter storm is leaving behind a rising death toll and widespread disruption. Local officials say at least 38 people have died across 14 states as snow, ice, and extreme cold settle over large parts of the country. Now, the system began developing late last week, dumping heavy snow, coating roads in ice, grounding flights, and knocking out power to hundreds of thousands of homes and businesses. While snowfall eased in some areas by Monday, forecasters warn that the danger is far from over. Nearly 200 million Americans remain under some form of winter weather alert, with bitter cold expected to linger into early February. Emergency responders have focused heavily on protecting vulnerable residents. In New York City, where temperatures fell to their lowest level in 8 years, at least 10 people were found dead outdoors. In Nashville, Tennessee, officials described the storm as a historic ice event, with shelters filled and emergency crews checking streets around the clock. Power outages added to the danger, with more than 550,000 customers left without electricity at the height of the storm. And in Texas, 3 young boys died after falling into an icy pond, while additional hypothermia deaths were reported across southern and midwestern states. Meteorologists are now tracking the possibility of another winter system later this week. Now, why this should matter to our audience at home is, well, extreme weather events are straining emergency services and exposing gaps in shelter, power, and public safety systems. And even after the snow stops falling, the human and economic effects can linger much, much longer. Our next story takes us back to Minneapolis, where a public town hall meant to give voters direct access to their representative took a sudden and dangerous turn. Representative Ilhan Omar was speaking with constituents when a man rushed toward the stage and sprayed an unknown liquid at her using a syringe. Security personnel and members of the audience tackled the suspect to the ground as people in the room shouted and moved away. Several witnesses reported a strong vinegar-like smell immediately after the liquid was released. Authorities say the substance has not yet been identified. Now, Omar was evaluated by medical staff and later said she was not seriously hurt and no one in the room showed any immediate symptoms. Police arrested the suspect, identified as 55-year-old Anthony Kazmierzak. Now, despite the disruption, Omar returned to the microphone and continued the town hall. She told reporters she would not be intimidated and later described herself as a survivor. The incident came against the backdrop of heightened political tension in Minnesota, and it followed renewed criticism of Omar by President Trump during a speech in Iowa, underscoring how heated immigration-related rhetoric has become. Leaders from both parties condemn the assault, and Capitol Police report that threats against members of Congress have risen sharply in recent years. Law enforcement agencies say they are reviewing security protocols for public events. Now, why this should matter to our audience at home is that lawmakers are being forced to balance public accessibility with personal safety. And episodes just like this raise real questions about how open civic engagement continues in an increasingly volatile political climate. All right, we're taking a quick break here at Roxom TV News, but when we're back, more of this morning's top news stories, including what's currently going on with Venezuela's leader. All that and more coming up when we return right after this quick message.
Some call me Chicken Little, others Bubble Boy. I'm a bit changed, but sounds familiar, right? Let me tell you a hard truth. The S&P isn't rising, the dollar's falling. That's the trick, monopoly money. It's ice melting by the second. Your savings, your salary, your time. Worth less every second. Everyone's using the wrong measuring stick. Switch the denominator. Price the S&P into Bitcoin. Hard, fixed, unprintable. Suddenly your unstoppable index, it's collapsing. And while you cling to dollars, well, Wall Street already switched. Before, you needed 2 brokers.
Still getting my ninja bonus though, right?
Plenty of spreadsheets. And my quant!
I hate this part.
I was right, and I'll be right again. If I were you, I'd thank me.
You know my name's Dave, right?
Welcome back to Roxom TV News. Our next story is taking place from Washington to Caracas as U.S. officials are quietly reassessing their strategy toward Venezuela's political transition. American intelligence agencies are raising doubts about whether Venezuela's interim president, Delcy Rodriguez, is prepared to fully align with the United States. As according to people familiar with classified assessments, analysts remain uncertain whether Rodriguez will sever her ties with long-standing partners such as Russia, China, and Iran. Now, that break is a central pillar of the Trump administration's approach to Venezuela, and the skepticism persists despite high-level engagement. CIA Director John Ratcliffe recently traveled to Caracas, and U.S. officials say Rodriguez has released political prisoners and authorized large oil sales to American buyers as signals of cooperation. At the same time, intelligence assessments note she is not publicly committed to expelling foreign diplomats or advisors. Her recent appearances alongside representatives from rival powers have fueled doubts about her long-term intentions. For Washington, the stakes are significant. Venezuela's oil reserves are strategically important, and limiting the influence of U.S. adversaries in the Western Hemisphere remains a priority. Now, if Rodriguez resists breaking with those alliances, it could complicate investment plans and weaken U.S. influence over the country's transition. Administration officials say President Trump continues applying what they describe as maximum leverage. Meanwhile, U.S. intelligence has concluded that opposition leader Maria Corina Machado lacks the political and security backing to govern effectively in the near term. That leaves Rodriguez, a former Maduro ally, as Washington's only viable partner for now. Now, why this should matter to viewers at home is that these decisions affect energy markets, regional stability, and U.S. influence close to home. And they show how limited America's options remain when regime change is not on the table. And that brings us to our next story, which begins far from the front lines in countries thousands of miles away from the Ukraine. Because new reporting suggests that Russia is increasingly relying on cash incentives, legal loopholes, and coercion to keep its war effort ongoing. An Associated Press investigation found Moscow offering large bonuses, fast-track citizenship, and even freedom from prison to recruit fighters. Some foreign nationals say they were misled into combat roles they never agreed to. Men from Bangladesh, India, Nepal, and several African countries told reporters they were promised civilian jobs. Instead, they say they were pressured into signing military contracts. Several described being beaten, threatened with imprisonment, or told they had no way out. One Bangladeshi worker recalled the commander telling him, "We bought you," after he protested being sent to the front lines. The recruitment push comes as President Vladimir Putin continues to avoid another nationwide draft. The Kremlin says participation is voluntary and claims hundreds of thousands have signed up. Those numbers cannot be independently verified, and human rights groups argue many contracts are misleading and nearly impossible to escape. They say prisoners, migrants, and foreign workers are especially vulnerable due to limited legal protections, and families across South Asia continue searching for missing relatives. Advocacy groups warn that vulnerable workers are being treated as expendable. And why this should matter to those of you watching comfortably at home is that modern wars increasingly rely on the most powerless to absorb the cost. And the full human toll often becomes visible only long after recruitment contracts are officially signed. All right, we're taking a break here at Roxom TV News, but when we're back, we're going to be talking about what TikTok is up to as they're blaming data center outages for app glitches they've been experiencing and driving customers a little bit nuts. We'll be back with that and more on Roxom TV News when we return right after this quick break.
Some call me Chicken Little, others Bubble Boy. I'm a bit changed, but sounds familiar, right? Let me tell you a hard truth. The S&P isn't rising, the dollar's falling. That's the trick, monopoly money. It's ice melting by the second. Your savings, your salary, your time. Worth less every second. Everyone's using the wrong measuring stick. Switch the denominator. Price the S&P into Bitcoin. Hard, fixed, unprintable. Suddenly your unstoppable index is collapsing. And while you cling to dollars, well, Wall Street already switched. Before, you needed 2 brokers.
Still getting my ninja bonus though, right?
Fuck. Plenty of spreadsheets. And my quant!
I hate this part.
I was right, and I'll be right again. If I were you, I'd thank me.
You know my name's Dave, right?
Security matters. Zappo Bank. The only way to bank your Bitcoin. Apply now at zappobank.com.
Welcome back to Roxom TV News. Our next story is taking place in the United States, where TikTok is pushing back against claims that recent app disruptions were tied to political censorship. Now, the company says a power outage in one of its data centers caused a systems failure, leading to bugs, slow loading times, and problems with posting and messaging. The explanation follows complaints from users who said content related to immigration enforcement, President Trump, and the word Epstein appeared to be blocked or suppressed. A spokesperson for TikTok's U.S. joint venture said the platform does not prohibit sharing the name and is investigating why some users experienced the issue. TikTok also claims videos related to recent immigration enforcement actions in Minnesota were available on the platform and had been since the weekend. The company added that some creators may temporarily see 0 views or likes due to server timeouts linked to the outage. The timing here is sensitive. You see, TikTok is adjusting to a new ownership structure under a US-led joint venture. ByteDance now holds a 19.9% stake, while US and global investors control the majority. Now, the restructuring followed pressure from Washington over national security concerns tied to Chinese ownership. TikTok says it is continuing to work with its data center partner to fully restore normal operations. Now, why this should matter to those of you at home is that platform outages can quickly blur into political controversy. As scrutiny over social media influence grows, even technical failures are being examined through a political lens. Moving on to our next story, this one's taking place inside corporate offices across America as thousands of Amazon employees are processing sudden and unsettling news. Amazon has confirmed one of its largest rounds of corporate layoffs in years, and the announcement followed a misfired internal email that circulated before any official notice. Some Amazon Web Services employees received messages suggesting they had already been laid off. The email was linked to an internal restructuring effort known as Project Dawn. It was quickly retracted and meetings were canceled, but confusion spread rapidly. Amazon later confirmed the broader plan. 16,000 corporate jobs are being eliminated. That completes a reduction of roughly 30,000 positions since October. Now, the cuts represent close to 10% of Amazon's corporate workforce. Warehouse and delivery staff are largely unaffected, and executives say the layoffs are meant to reduce management layers, speed up decisions, and prepare for heavier use of artificial intelligence. Affected teams include cloud computing, retail streaming, and human resources. Amazon leadership has acknowledged it overexpanded during the pandemic hiring boom, and company officials insist this is not the start of routine, recurring layoffs. They have also left open the possibility of further adjustments as automation expands. Now, why this should matter to you at home, well, is that Amazon often sets the tone for corporate America, and workforce decisions here tend to ripple quickly across tech and labor markets. And here's my take on this one, guys, and it's not a good one. This is only the beginning of what we're seeing here. Mind you, they said 16,000 employees are being or jobs are being eliminated, and a big part of it is artificial intelligence. And like we said in the story, Amazon kind of helps lead the way for a lot of these big tech corporate giants. So what we're seeing right now is just the beginning of AI slowly wrapping its hold around big tech. And who's going to be suffering for this? Employees, workers, people are going to be losing their jobs en masse more and more often because of this type of thing. So what we're seeing right now, gang, is only the beginning of a greater layoff situation we're going to see in the tech market as AI continues to gain more prevalence over jobs that you and I used to work. So I don't love it, but it's the way the world seems to be moving. All right, we're moving on next to the United Kingdom, where regulators are moving to curb how artificial intelligence reshapes online search. You see, British authorities are pressing Google to give publishers more control over whether their content appears in AI-generated search summaries. The push comes as concern grows that Google's AI overviews are answering users' questions directly without sending traffic to original sources. Regulators argue that this shift could undermine news organizations and smaller publishers that rely on search referrals. The proposal is part of a broader effort by the UK's Competition and Markets Authority to rein in Google's dominance of online search. After designating Google as having strategic market status, the CMA says it now has the authority to require changes that promote competition and transparency. Now, under the plan, websites would be able to block their content from being used in AI summaries or standalone AI models. At the same time, those sites could still appear in traditional search results. Regulators say that balance is meant to protect consumer choice while supporting the sustainability of online journalism. The consultation period on the proposed rules runs through late February, with potential enforcement actions to follow. Google says it is open to adjustments, but warns that broad opt-outs could harm the search experience. And company executives argue that AI summaries help users discover news sources and that new controls must avoid fragmenting results. For now, negotiations are ongoing between regulators and tech companies, and why this should matter to those of you at home is that these rules could shape how information is found, shared, and paid for in an AI-driven internet. And the outcome in the UK could influence how other countries regulate AI and search platforms moving forward. All right, we're taking a quick break here at Roxom TV News, but when we're back, more of today's top stories, so stay tuned. We'll be back with you right after this quick break. Are you interested in effortlessly growing your Bitcoin portfolio? I sure am. And the Bitcoin credit card by Gemini earns you Bitcoin back on every purchase. You can use it like any credit card. Buy lunch, gas, or your weekly groceries, and you'll earn up to 4% back instantly in Bitcoin or one of over 50 other cryptos straight to your account. All that with no annual fee. And right now, you can grab a $200 Bitcoin welcome bonus. It's the easiest way to start building your Bitcoin stack. Just go to Gemini.com to learn more. Welcome back to Roxom TV News. Currently, the Bitcoin price is sitting at $89,000 this morning, and that brings us to our Bitcoin story of the hour that's occurring in Pierre, South Dakota, where lawmakers are opening the door to something that would have sounded unthinkable just a few years ago, putting public money into Bitcoin. State Representative Logan Manhart announced the introduction of a new bill that would allow the state to invest a portion of its managed funds directly into Bitcoin. Manhart summed up the proposal with a short and very deliberate message: strong money, strong state. Wise man. Now, the legislation filed as House Bill 1155 would authorize South Dakota's State Investment Council to allocate up to 10% of eligible state-managed funds into Bitcoin. The bill also includes specific guardrails around custody and security, signaling that this is meant to be treated as a long-term strategic holding rather than a speculative trade. Now, this is not South Dakota's first attempt to move in this direction. A similar proposal introduced during the 2025 legislative session failed to advance. What is different now, though, is the broader environment. You see, in January of 2026 alone, multiple U.S. states have introduced Bitcoin-related legislation, ranging from strategic reserve proposals to former study commissions examining how Bitcoin could fit into state balance sheets. That growing activity is happening against a backdrop of persistent inflation, concerns, rising government debt, and ongoing questions about long-term monetary credibility. Now, in that context, Bitcoin is increasingly being discussed by lawmakers as money, not simply a piece of technology or a niche investment. Supporters of the South Dakota bill argue that Bitcoin's fixed supply and global liquidity make it worth considering as a sovereign-grade asset. Now, critics counter that volatility and regulatory uncertainty still make it too risky for public funds, and the bill's fate is far from certain, but its introduction adds another clear data point. Now, why this should matter to our audience at home is that state governments are beginning to treat Bitcoin less like an experiment and more like a financial tool. And as more states explore similar moves, the conversation around Bitcoin is shifting from should this exist to how do we manage it responsibly. And I want to give you my quick take on this one, gang, because this is only the beginning. We've seen it in other states around the country, not just this year, but last year. Bitcoin is being treated as an asset for the future, not a speculative play. And remember, over the course of Bitcoin's history, we've seen a lot of changes and no more than we saw in the last year alone. We have government tailwinds that we have never had before that are pushing Bitcoin into the monetary spotlight and securing its place as a fixture of the financial system for years, decades, and centuries to come. So while this might not even pass like it didn't last year in South Dakota, the signal here is the important thing. Governments, state governments, federal government are starting to treat Bitcoin as an asset that must be held over the long term to hedge against the inflation that we are seeing in this country and in so many others across the globe. So while a small story as it's by itself, this signals a much larger shift that we are seeing in the monetary policy of the world right now. So small in scale, but big in signal. All right, gang. Well, that is a wrap for today's episode here at RoxomTV News. As always, I want to thank you all so much for tuning in. We're here every single day of the week, Monday through Friday, to bring you the top news so that you are spending, your time doing whatever else you like to do in your free time. We bring the top stories for you here. Now, if you haven't already, we'd really appreciate it if you did the thing. Make sure to like, follow, and subscribe to RoxomTV, RoxomTV News, and me at Hank at RoxomTV, wherever you choose to do your scrolling. We're on all the big platforms: YouTube, Rumble, X, Instagram, TikTok. You can find us all there. I think even Blue Sky we might be on. So make sure you're following us there. And remember, we'll be back tomorrow at our normal time of 8 a.m. Pacific right here on RoxomTV News to bring you all the top stories of the day. So thanks for tuning in, and we will see you boys and girls tomorrow. In the meantime, stay safe, stay informed, and hodl on. See you boys and girls tomorrow.